The dust storm was coming fast from the east, and Mariah Grayson knew she did not have much time left before the wagon wheel gave out completely. She stood alone on the barren stretch of Arizona territory between Kingman and the Colorado River, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon while her hands trembled against the splintered wood of the broken axle. Her father had died 3 days ago from fever, and she had buried him herself beside the trail with nothing but a flat rock to mark where he lay. Now the wagon that carried everything she owned in this world was crippled. Her 2 horses were gone, stolen in the night by raiders who had mercifully left her alive, and the nearest town was at least 15 miles in either direction. She had not eaten since yesterday morning. Her water was nearly gone, and the desert cold would kill her as surely as the heat if she spent another night exposed without shelter or fire. Mariah sank to her knees in the red dirt, her calico dress already torn and stained beyond recognition. She was 22 years old, and she was going to die out here alone. The thought filled her with a grief so profound that she could barely breathe. Her father had promised her a new life in California, a fresh start after her mother passed from consumption back in Missouri. They had sold everything, packed what little remained, and headed west with dreams of orchards and ocean breezes. Instead, she knelt in the dust with dried tears on her face and blood on her hands from trying to fix the impossible. She closed her eyes and pressed her palms together, her lips moving in desperate prayer as the sun painted the sky orange and pink. God had not been kind to her family, but she prayed anyway because it was all she had left. She prayed for a miracle, for salvation, for any sign that she was not forgotten in this vast and terrible wilderness. The wind picked up, carrying sand that stung her cheeks, and she heard the distant rumble of the approaching storm. She would be dead by morning. Then she heard hoofbeats. Mariah opened her eyes and looked up, squinting against the setting sun. A rider was coming from the west, silhouetted black against the burning sky, moving at a steady gallop. Her heart hammered in her chest. It could be anyone. It could be the raiders coming back. It could be someone worse. But she was already dying, so she stayed on her knees and watched the rider approach, her hands still clasped in prayer. The horse slowed as it neared, and Mariah could make out more details. The rider was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark hat and duster that flapped behind him. He had a rifle in a saddle holster and saddlebags that looked well stocked. As he came closer, she saw his face. He was young, maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes that caught the last light of day. His jaw was covered in several days of stubble, and there was a hardness to his features that spoke of a difficult life. But when he looked down at her from his horse, his expression softened with concern. He pulled his horse to a stop a few feet away and dismounted in one smooth motion. He stood there for a moment, taking in the scene, the broken wagon, her torn dress, her desperate face. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady and certain. "I am here." Those 3 words broke something inside Mariah, and she felt tears spill down her cheeks. She tried to speak, but could not make her voice work. The cowboy moved closer, kneeling down so they were at eye level. Up close, she could see that his eyes were a deep brown, almost black, and they were looking at her with an intensity that made her feel seen for the first time in weeks. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentle now. Mariah shook her head, then reconsidered. "Thirsty," she managed to whisper. "No water." He stood immediately and went to his horse, pulling a canteen from the saddle. He returned and held it out to her, and she took it with shaking hands, drinking deeply. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it was the most wonderful thing she had ever experienced. He let her drink her fill, then gently took the canteen back when she was done. "What happened?" he asked, Looking around again at the wagon and the empty harness, Mariah found her voice, though it came out hoarse and broken. "My father died. Fever. 3 days ago. Then raiders came and took the horses. The wheel broke this morning when I tried to move the wagon myself. I have been here all day." The cowboy's jaw tightened. "You are alone?" "Yes." He stood and walked around the wagon, examining the damage. Mariah watched him, still hardly believing he was real. He moved with purpose, checking the broken axle, looking inside the wagon bed at her belongings. Finally, he came back to where she still knelt in the dirt. "I am Kellan Davies," he said, offering his hand. "I run cattle for the Double K Ranch outside Kingman. I was heading back from checking fence lines when I saw your wagon." Mariah took his hand and let him help her to her feet. Her legs were unsteady and she swayed. Kellan caught her elbow, steadying her with a firm grip. "I am Mariah Grayson," she said. "From Missouri. We were going to California." Kellan nodded slowly, his eyes still on her face. "That wheel is not getting fixed out here, and that storm is coming fast. I need to get you to shelter. Can you ride?" "I can ride." "Good." He led her to his horse, a big roan gelding with intelligent eyes. "We will take what we can carry and come back for the rest tomorrow with a proper wagon. What do you need most?" Mariah's mind felt sluggish, but she tried to think. "There is a trunk with my mother's things. Papers and photographs, some clothes, my father's Bible." Kellan went to the wagon and found the trunk she described. It was not large, and he secured it behind his saddle with practiced efficiency. He also grabbed a blanket roll and a small bag that contained what little food Mariah had left. Then he returned to her side. "Up you go," he said, and before she could protest, he had lifted her by the waist and set her on the horse's back. She grabbed the saddle horn to steady herself, suddenly aware of how weak she had become. Kellan swung up behind her, his arm coming around her waist to hold the reins. She was pressed back against his chest, and she could feel the solid warmth of him through her thin dress. "Hold on," he said quietly near her ear, and then they were moving. The ride to Kingman took over an hour, and by the time they arrived, full darkness had fallen and the storm had caught them. Rain came down in sheets, soaking them both, but Kellan did not slow. He guided the horse through the muddy streets of the small town to a whitewashed building with a sign that read "Rooms and Meals." He dismounted first, then reached up and lifted Mariah down as if she weighed nothing. She stood in the rain, shivering, while he tied his horse and grabbed her trunk. "Come on," he said, and she followed him inside. The warmth hit her like a wall. There was a fire burning in a stone fireplace, and a few people sat at tables eating supper. A woman with gray hair and a kind face looked up from behind a counter and smiled when she saw Kellan. "Kellan Davies, you are soaked through," she said. Then her eyes moved to Mariah and her expression changed to concern. "Oh my Lord, what happened to this poor girl?" "Found her on the trail, Martha," Kellan said. "Stranded, no water, no horses. She needs a room and a hot meal." Martha came around the counter immediately, taking in Mariah's condition with experienced eyes. "You come with me, dear. We will get you into dry clothes and warmed up. Kellan, you get yourself dry too. I will bring food up shortly." Mariah wanted to say something to thank Kellan, but Martha was already guiding her toward a staircase, and she was too exhausted to resist. She looked back once and saw Kellan watching her, his hat in his hands, water dripping from his hair. Their eyes met, and something passed between them that Mariah could not name. Then Martha led her upstairs, and he was out of sight. The room Martha brought her to was small but clean, with a real bed and a washstand. Martha helped her out of her wet, ruined dress and into a nightgown that was too large but soft and warm. She brought hot water and clean cloths and helped Mariah wash the dust and blood from her hands and face. Then she sat Mariah down on the bed and brushed out her long brown hair, working through the tangles with patient hands. "You are safe now," Martha said softly. "Kellan Davies is a good man, one of the best I know. You were lucky he found you." "I was praying," Mariah heard herself say. "I was praying for a miracle, and then he came." Martha smiled. "Well, maybe prayers get answered more than we think." There was a knock at the door, and Martha opened it to accept a tray of food from a young boy. She brought it to Mariah and set it on her lap. There was hot stew, fresh bread, and a cup of tea. Mariah ate slowly, her stomach protesting at first, then accepting the nourishment gratefully. When she was done, Martha took the tray and pulled the blankets up over her. "You sleep now," Martha said. "We will sort everything out in the morning." But as Martha turned to leave, Mariah caught her hand. "Is he still here?" "Kellan," Martha's eyes softened. "He is downstairs eating his own supper. Do you want me to send him up?" Mariah's cheeks flushed. "I just want to thank him properly." "He knows you are grateful, dear." "But I will tell him you asked after him." Martha patted her hand and left, closing the door softly behind her. Mariah lay back against the pillows and closed her eyes. She could hardly believe that this morning she had been certain she would die. Now she was clean, fed, warm, and safe. And it was all because of a stranger who had appeared like an answer to prayer. She pictured his face, the intensity in his dark eyes, the gentleness in his hands when he had helped her drink. She fell asleep thinking about the way he had said those 3 words, "I am here." When Mariah woke, sunlight was streaming through the window. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was. Then memory returned, and with it, a flood of emotions. Grief for her father, fear about her future, and a strange warmth when she thought of Kellan Davies. There was a knock at the door, and Martha entered with a dress draped over her arm. "Good morning, dear," Martha said cheerfully. "I brought you something proper to wear. It belonged to my daughter before she moved to Tucson. I think it will fit you well enough." The dress was a simple blue cotton, clean and mended. Mariah accepted it gratefully and dressed while Martha waited outside. When she emerged, Martha led her downstairs to the dining room where breakfast was being served. Mariah's eyes immediately searched for Kellan, but he was not there. "He left at first light," Martha said, reading her expression. "Went out to retrieve your wagon and whatever could be salvaged. He said he would be back by noon." Mariah felt a strange disappointment, but she nodded and sat down to eat the breakfast Martha brought her. Eggs, bacon, biscuits with gravy. Food had never tasted so good. As she ate, she became aware of other people in the room staring at her. A couple of men at a corner table were talking in low voices, glancing her way. She tried to ignore them, but their attention made her uncomfortable. One of them, a man with a thick mustache and a silver star pinned to his vest, stood and walked over to her table. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice polite but official. "I am Sheriff Tom Rawlings. I heard about your situation, and I wanted to offer my condolences about your father. I also wanted to ask you a few questions about the men who took your horses, if you are up to it." Mariah set down her fork. "I did not see them clearly. It was dark, and they came when I was sleeping in the wagon. I heard voices, rough voices, and when I looked out, there were 3 of them. They had masks over their faces. One of them saw me looking and told me to stay quiet if I wanted to live. They took both horses and rode off south." The sheriff nodded, pulling out a small notebook and making notes. 3 men, headed south. That matches with reports of a gang that has been operating between here and Prescott. They have stolen horses from a couple of other travelers, too. We have been trying to catch them, but they are slippery." He looked at her with genuine sympathy. "I am sorry this happened to you, miss. It is a hard country out here." "Thank you, Sheriff," Mariah said quietly. He tipped his hat and returned to his table. Mariah finished her breakfast in silence, her mind churning. Everything she and her father had worked for was gone. The horses, the wagon, most of their supplies. All she had left was what Kellan had been able to bring in last night and whatever he could salvage today. She had no money to speak of, nowhere to go, and no one to help her. Except Kellan had helped her, a stranger with no obligation to her whatsoever. She spent the morning in her room, looking through the trunk Kellan had saved. Her mother's wedding dress, carefully folded, a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. Her father's Bible with his notes in the margins, letters from relatives back east. These small treasures were all she had left of her family, and she held them close, letting herself cry for everything she had lost. Around midday, she heard the sound of wagon wheels outside. She looked out the window and saw Kellan pulling up in a wagon hitched to two unfamiliar horses. The bed of the wagon was loaded with her belongings. Her heart lifted and she hurried downstairs. Kellan was unloading the wagon when she came outside. He looked up as she approached and a small smile crossed his face. He looked tired, covered in dust, but his eyes brightened when he saw her. "You look better," he said, straightening up. "I am better, thanks to you," Mariah said. "You brought everything." "Most of it," he said. "Some things were not worth saving, but I got your clothes, your pots and pans, tools, and the rest of your food supplies. The wagon itself is fixable, but it will take time and money." Mariah's face fell. "I do not have money." Kellan wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "We will figure something out. First, let us get this stored somewhere safe. Martha said you can keep things in her shed out back." They worked together to unload the wagon, carrying boxes and bags to the small shed behind the boarding house. It took an hour, and by the end, Mariah was breathing hard but felt useful for the first time in days. When everything was stored, Kellan latched the shed door and turned to her. "We should talk about what comes next," he said. Mariah nodded, her stomach tightening with anxiety. They sat on a bench outside the boarding house in the shade of a cottonwood tree. The street was quiet, just a few people moving about their business. Kellan took off his hat and ran his hand through his hair. "You cannot get to California without money or a way to travel," he said, stating the obvious. "Do you have anyone there? Anyone expecting you?" "No," Mariah admitted. "It was just my father's dream. He had heard there was work and land. We did not have specific plans." Kellan was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Can you go back to Missouri? There is nothing for me there. We sold the farm to pay for this trip." "What about other family? My mother had a sister in Ohio, but we have not heard from her in years. I would not even know how to find her." Mariah felt the weight of her situation pressing down on her again. "I am alone." Kellan looked at her, and there was something in his eyes she could not read. "You do not have to be alone," he said quietly. "Kingman is a small town, but there are good people here. There is work if you are willing. Martha is always looking for help at the boarding house. The general store needs someone. The school teacher is getting old and could use an assistant." "You mean I should stay here?" Mariah asked, surprised. "Why not? You do not have anywhere else to go and you would be safe. It is not California, but it is a place to start over." Mariah looked down at her hands, considering. She had never thought about staying in Arizona. It seemed like a defeat, giving up on her father's dream, but Kellan was right. She had no resources, no destination, and no options, and something about the idea of staying here near him made her heart beat a little faster. "I will think about it," she said. "Take your time," Kellan said. He stood and put his hat back on. "I need to get back to the ranch. My boss is probably wondering where I have been, but I will come back in a few days to check on you." Mariah stood too, suddenly not wanting him to leave. "Kellan, I do not know how to thank you. You saved my life. You brought my things back. You have been kinder to me than I had any right to expect." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression serious. "You do not need to thank me, Mariah. I just did what anyone should do." "But most people would not have," she said softly. He smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his face. "Maybe not, but I am glad I did." He tipped his hat to her. "Take care of yourself, Mariah Grayson." Then he climbed onto the wagon and drove away, leaving Mariah standing under the cottonwood tree watching him go. The next few days passed in a blur. Martha offered Mariah work at the boarding house, helping with cooking, cleaning, and serving meals. Mariah accepted gratefully, needing both the work and the distraction. Martha paid her in room and board plus a small wage, and it was enough for Mariah to feel like she was not completely helpless. She fell into a routine. Up before dawn to help with breakfast, cleaning rooms in the morning, helping with the midday meal, mending linens in the afternoon, and serving supper in the evening. The work was hard but honest, and Martha was kind. The other residents of the boarding house were mostly miners and ranch hands, rough men but generally respectful. Sheriff Rawlings took his meals there regularly and always nodded politely to Mariah when he saw her. But despite the busyness of her days, Mariah found her thoughts constantly drifting to Kellan. She replayed their conversations in her mind, remembered the way he had looked at her, the gentleness in his touch. She wondered if he thought about her too, or if she had been just another person in need that he had helped. On the fourth day after she had last seen him, he returned. Mariah was serving supper when he walked in, dusty from the trail, his hat in his hands. Her heart jumped in her chest, and she nearly dropped the plate she was carrying. Their eyes met across the room, and he smiled. She smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. He took a seat at an empty table, and she brought him water and a menu, even though she knew he did not need it. Martha served the same thing every night: beef stew or fried chicken, potatoes, beans, and cornbread. "How have you been?" he asked, looking up at her. "Well," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Martha gave me work. I am staying on here for now." "I am glad," he said, and he sounded like he meant it. "You decided to stay in Kingman, for now. I do not have many options, but it is not so bad here." "It grows on you," Kellan said. His eyes were warm, and he was looking at her in a way that made her feel self-conscious. "I was hoping you would still be here." "You were?" The question came out before she could stop it. He nodded. "I was wondering if you might like to take a walk with me after you finish your work. I could show you some of the town. It is a nice evening." Mariah felt her cheeks flush. "I would like that." "Good. I will wait." She brought him his supper and tried to focus on her other customers, but she was intensely aware of Kellan's presence the whole time. When the supper rush finally ended and Martha shooed her away, telling her she had worked enough for the day, Mariah went upstairs to quickly check her appearance in the small mirror in her room. Her hair was coming loose from its bun, and there was a smudge of flour on her cheek. She cleaned up as best she could, pinned her hair back properly, and smoothed down her dress. When she came back downstairs, Kellan was waiting by the door. He had cleaned up too, brushed the dust from his clothes and run water through his hair. He offered her his arm, and she took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath her hand. They walked through Kingman as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Kellan showed her the general store, the blacksmith shop, the small church with its white steeple. He introduced her to people they passed, and everyone seemed to know and respect him. He told her about the town, how it had grown up around the railroad and mining, how it was rough but getting more civilized every year. "You like it here?" Mariah asked as they walked along the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open desert. "I do," Kellan said. "It is not fancy, but it is honest. People work hard, look out for each other mostly. And the land, it gets in your blood after a while." All this space, the mountains in the distance, the big sky, it makes you feel small but also free. Mariah looked out at the landscape, trying to see it through his eyes. It was so different from Missouri, where everything was green and close. Here, everything was red and brown and open. It was harsh but also beautiful in its own way. "I am starting to see it," she said. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, and then Kellan spoke again, his voice more hesitant. "Mariah, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That day I found you when you were praying, what were you praying for?" Mariah felt her throat tighten. "I was praying for a miracle. I was praying for God to send someone to help me because I could not help myself. And then you came." Kellan stopped walking and turned to face her. The last light of the sun was in his eyes, making them glow almost gold. "I have been thinking about that," he said. "About how I decided to take that trail that day. I usually take a different route back to the ranch, but something made me go that way. I do not know what it was, just a feeling." "Maybe it was the same God who heard my prayer," Mariah said softly. "Maybe," Kellan said. He was looking at her so intently that she felt like she could not breathe. "Or maybe it was just luck. Either way, I am glad I found you. I am glad too." They stood there in the fading light, and Mariah felt something shifting between them, something deeper than gratitude or simple attraction. It was a recognition, a sense that they were meant to find each other. She did not know how to name it, but she felt it in her bones. Kellan cleared his throat and looked away, breaking the moment. "I should get you back before it gets dark." They walked back to the boarding house, and Kellan left her at the door with a promise to visit again soon. Mariah went to bed that night with her heart full of a strange, hopeful feeling she had not felt in a very long time. Over the next several weeks, Kellan visited Kingman regularly. Sometimes he came for business, bringing cattle to the stockyards or picking up supplies. Sometimes he came just to see Mariah. They fell into a pattern of walking together in the evenings, talking about their lives, their hopes, their fears. Mariah learned that Kellan had grown up in Texas, that his parents had died when he was young, that he had been working ranches since he was 14. He was quiet and serious, but he had a dry sense of humor that surprised her, and when he smiled, she felt like the sun had come out. Kellan learned that Mariah loved to read, that she had wanted to be a teacher before her mother got sick, that she missed the green hills of Missouri, but was starting to love the wide, open skies of Arizona. He learned that she was stronger than she looked, that she did not complain even when the work was hard, and that when she laughed, it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. They did not speak about what was growing between them, but everyone else in town could see it. Martha teased Mariah gently, asking when Kellan was going to make his intentions known. The ranch hands who came to the boarding house started referring to Mariah as Kellan's girl, and he did not correct them. One evening, about 2 months after they had met, Kellan invited Mariah to visit the ranch where he worked. She accepted eagerly, curious to see the place he talked about so often. He picked her up on a Sunday morning in a wagon pulled by a well-mannered mare, and they drove out of town into the open range. The Double K Ranch was about an hour outside Kingman, a sprawling property with good grazing land and a creek that ran year-round. The main house was built of adobe with a red tile roof, and there were several outbuildings, a barn, a bunkhouse, a cookhouse. Cattle dotted the hills in the distance, and horses grazed in a fenced pasture. Kellan introduced her to his boss, Carl Drummond, a grizzled man in his 60s who ran the ranch with his wife, Clara. They welcomed Mariah warmly, and Clara insisted she stay for the midday meal. Over plates of roast beef and vegetables from Clara's garden, they talked about the ranch, about cattle prices, about the challenges of making a living in this country. After the meal, Kellan took Mariah on a tour of the property. He showed her the barn where the horses were kept, let her pet the nose of a gentle mare. He took her down to the creek, where cottonwood trees provided shade, and they sat on the bank with their feet in the cool water. "This is a good place," Mariah said, looking around. "I can see why you like it here." "It is a good place," Kellan agreed. "Carl is a fair boss, pays a decent wage. I have been saving money thinking about the future." "What kind of future?" Mariah asked, curious. Kellan picked up a stone and tossed it into the creek. "I want my own ranch someday. Not as big as this, maybe, but something I can build with my own hands. A place to raise a family, grow old." He glanced at her, then looked away quickly. "What about you? What do you want for your future?" Mariah considered. 2 months ago, she would not have had an answer. But now, sitting here beside Kellan with the sun on her face and the sound of water in her ears, she knew exactly what she wanted. "I want a home," she said. "A real home, not just a place to sleep. I want people to love and who love me. I want to feel like I belong somewhere." She hesitated, then added quietly, "I want to stop feeling so alone." Kellan turned to look at her, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. "You are not alone, Mariah, not anymore." "I know," she said, "because of you." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers rough and calloused but warm. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just being together. It was the first time they had held hands, and it felt both innocent and momentous. On the ride back to Kingman, Mariah was quiet, thinking about what it would mean to build a life here, in this place she had never intended to stay. She thought about Kellan's dream of a ranch, of a family, and she wondered if she could be part of that dream. It felt too soon to think such things, but her heart was not listening to logic. When they reached the boarding house, Kellan helped her down from the wagon and walked her to the door. He stood there, hat in hands, looking like he wanted to say something but did not know how. "Thank you for today," Mariah said. "I loved seeing the ranch." "I am glad," Kellan said. "Mariah, I need to ask you something." Her heart started beating faster. "Yes. I have been thinking about you constantly," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "Ever since the day I found you. I cannot stop thinking about you. And I know it has not been very long, but I feel like I have known you much longer, like I was supposed to find you that day." He looked directly into her eyes. "I would like to court you properly, if you would allow me." Mariah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I would like that very much." Kellan's face broke into a wide smile, and he took her hand again, squeezing it gently. "I will do right by you, Mariah, I promise." "I know you will," she said. He left then, and Mariah went inside feeling like she was walking on air. Martha took one look at her face and laughed. "He finally asked, did he?" "He did," Mariah said, unable to stop smiling. "About time," Martha said, pulling her into a hug. "That boy has been smitten with you from the start." The courtship was everything Mariah had dreamed of and nothing she had expected. Kellan was not flowery or poetic, but he was steadfast and attentive. He visited as often as his work allowed, always bringing small gifts: wildflowers, a hair ribbon from the general store, a book he thought she might like. He took her to church on Sundays, sat beside her with his hand holding hers. He introduced her to more people, integrated her into the community, made sure everyone knew she was important to him. They went on picnics in the desert, rode horses together when Carl lent Kellan a second mount. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. Kellan was a good listener, and Mariah found herself sharing things she had never told anyone else. Her fears, her dreams, her grief over losing her parents. He shared his own stories too, about growing up rough, about learning to survive, about the loneliness of drifting from ranch to ranch with no place to call home. "That is why I want my own land," he told her one evening as they watched the sunset from a hilltop outside town. "I am tired of belonging nowhere. I want roots." "I understand that," Mariah said. "I have been drifting since my mother died. Even when my father was alive, we were always moving toward something else, never just being where we were." "We could build something together," Kellan said, then looked startled as if he had not meant to say that out loud. But Mariah did not pull away. "We could," she said softly. As autumn turned to winter, their relationship deepened. There was a dance in town to celebrate Thanksgiving, and Kellan brought Mariah, looking uncomfortable in a clean shirt and bolo tie. She had borrowed a dress from Martha's daughter's old wardrobe, a green one that brought out her eyes, and when Kellan saw her, he stared for a long moment before offering his arm. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You look handsome," she replied, and he ducked his head, embarrassed but pleased. They danced together, and though Kellan was not graceful, he was earnest, holding her like she was something precious. Mariah rested her head against his shoulder and felt completely at peace. This was where she was meant to be. After the dance, they walked back slowly through the cold night, Mariah wrapped in Kellan's coat. When they reached the boarding house, he stopped her before she could go inside. "Mariah, I need to tell you something," he said, his breath making clouds in the cold air. "What is it?" "I love you," he said simply. "I have loved you for a while now, but I wanted to be sure before I said it. But I am sure. I love you and I want to spend my life with you." Mariah felt her eyes fill with tears. "I love you too, Kellan, so much." He pulled her into his arms and held her close, and they stood like that for a long time, just holding each other. Then he tilted her face up and kissed her, soft and gentle and full of promise. It was Mariah's first kiss, and it was perfect. When they finally pulled apart, Kellan was smiling. "I do not have much to offer you yet," he said. "But I am saving money and I am working hard. In a few years I will have enough to buy land, start my own place. And when I do, I want you there with me. As my wife, if you will have me." "Are you asking me to marry you?" Mariah asked, her heart pounding. "Not yet," Kellan said. "I want to do it right. I want to have something to offer you first, but I am telling you my intentions. I want to marry you, Mariah Grayson, when the time is right." "I will wait," Mariah said. "However long it takes." They kissed again, and Mariah went to bed that night knowing that her future was settled. She would marry Kellan Davies and they would build a life together. The winter passed slowly. Kellan worked long hours at the ranch, saving every penny he could. Mariah continued working for Martha, but she also started teaching reading and writing to some of the children in town who could not afford proper school. It gave her a sense of purpose and reminded her of her old dreams. Christmas came, and Kellan gave Mariah a beautiful shawl he had ordered from a catalog. She gave him a hand-knitted scarf and gloves. They spent Christmas Day at the ranch with Carl and Clara, who had become like family to both of them. In the spring, Kellan took Mariah to see a piece of land about 5 miles from the ranch. It was 160 acres with a creek running through it, good grazing, and a spot perfect for a house. He had been negotiating with the owner for months, and he finally had enough saved for a down payment. "This could be ours," he said, holding her hand as they stood on the land. "I can build us a house right there near the creek. We can start with a few head of cattle, build up slowly. It will be hard work, but we can do it." "It is perfect," Mariah said, imagining a house, a garden, children playing by the creek. "When can we buy it?" "I am making the deal next week," Kellan said. "And then, if you are still willing, I would like to marry you as soon as possible." Mariah threw her arms around his neck. "Yes, yes, of course I am willing." Kellan laughed and spun her around, and they kissed there on the land that would become their home. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Kingman. Mariah wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her. Martha stood up with her, and Carl stood up with Kellan. The whole town turned out for the ceremony, it seemed. Sheriff Rawlings was there, and Clara, and all the men from the ranch and the families Mariah had been teaching. It was simple but beautiful, and when Kellan slipped a gold band on Mariah's finger and promised to love and cherish her for the rest of his life, she knew that her prayer at sunset all those months ago had been answered beyond anything she could have imagined. They spent their wedding night in a room at the boarding house that Martha had decorated with wildflowers. Kellan was gentle and patient, and Mariah felt safe and loved in his arms. They talked late into the night about their plans, their dreams, their future. "I never thought I would be this happy," Mariah whispered as they lay together in the darkness. "Neither did I," Kellan said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "But here we are." "Here we are," she agreed. The next day they moved out to their land. They lived in a tent while Kellan built their house, working every spare moment he was not at the ranch. Mariah helped as much as she could, hauling water, cooking meals over an open fire, holding boards while he hammered. It was hard work, but they were doing it together, and that made all the difference. By summer, the house was finished. It was small, just 3 rooms, but it was solid and well built with a porch that faced the creek. Mariah planted a garden, and Kellan brought home their first cattle, 3 heifers and a bull. They were officially ranchers, though on a much smaller scale than the Double K. Carl gave Kellan flexible work at the ranch, letting him take time to tend his own herd while still earning wages. It was hard to balance both, but Kellan was determined to make it work. Mariah continued teaching a few children who came out to the ranch once a week for lessons. They were building a life, brick by brick. In the fall, Mariah realized she was pregnant. She told Kellan one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set. He was silent for a moment, and then he pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Mariah asked, though she could feel the answer in the way he held her. "I am more than happy," Kellan said. "I am blessed." The pregnancy was difficult. Mariah was sick for the first few months, and the nearest doctor was in Kingman, an hour away by wagon. But Clara came to visit often, bringing advice and remedies, and Martha visited when she could. Kellan was attentive and worried, making sure Mariah did not work too hard, doing extra chores himself. In May, as the desert bloomed with wildflowers, Mariah went into labor. Clara and Martha were both there, and Kellan paced outside the house, unable to sit still. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Mariah was not sure she would survive. But finally, just as the sun was setting, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Kellan was allowed in to meet his son, and he knelt beside the bed with tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand. "What should we name him?" Mariah asked, exhausted but happy. Kellan thought for a moment. "What about James, after your father?" Mariah's eyes filled with tears. "James is perfect." Baby James was a good baby, healthy and strong. He had Kellan's dark hair and Mariah's gray eyes. Kellan was a devoted father, waking in the night to help with feedings, rocking James when he cried, singing him off-key lullabies. Mariah fell in love with Kellan all over again, watching him with their son. Life settled into a new rhythm. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. Kellan and Mariah worked side by side, raising cattle, tending the garden, caring for James. Money was tight, but they had everything they needed. They had each other, they had their son, and they had a home they had built together. When James was 2, Mariah became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and she gave birth to a daughter they named Clara, after the woman who had become like a mother to them both. Clara the elder was thrilled and insisted on being called Grandma Clara from then on. The years passed. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved to follow his father around the ranch. Little Clara was bright and curious, always asking questions. Kellan expanded their herd, bought more land. Mariah's garden flourished and she started selling vegetables in town. They were not rich, but they were comfortable and, more importantly, they were happy. One evening, when James was 8 and Clara was 6, the family sat on the porch together watching the sunset. James was whittling a stick, Clara was playing with a doll Martha had made her, and Kellan had his arm around Mariah's shoulders. "You ever think about that day?" Kellan asked quietly. "The day we met, I think about it often," Mariah said. "I was so certain I was going to die, and then you appeared like an answer to prayer." "I almost took the other trail that day," Kellan said. "I was tired and wanted to get home, but something told me to go that way. I have never been so glad I listened to a feeling." "I am glad too," Mariah said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I cannot imagine my life without you, without all of this." "It is funny how life works out," Kellan said. "All the hard things we went through, all the losses, they led us here. To each other." "Do you think you would do it all again?" Mariah asked. "Knowing what you know now," Kellan looked at her, then at their children, then out at the land they had worked so hard to build. "Every single bit of it," he said, "if it meant ending up here with you." Mariah smiled and kissed him, soft and sweet. After all these years, she still felt that flutter in her chest when he looked at her like she was the most important thing in the world. When James was 12 and Clara was 10, Kellan decided it was time to expand. The ranch was doing well, and they could afford to take on more cattle. He also hired a young ranch hand, a boy named Tom who was about 18 and reminded Kellan of himself at that age, alone and looking for a place to belong. Tom was a hard worker, and he quickly became part of the family. He ate meals with them, slept in the small bunkhouse Kellan had built, and helped James learn the ranching business. Clara followed both of them around like a puppy, asking endless questions. Mariah's teaching had expanded too. She now taught nearly a dozen children, and there was talk in Kingman of building a proper schoolhouse and hiring her as the official teacher. She was considering it, though she worried about leaving the ranch so often. "You should do it," Kellan told her. "You are a wonderful teacher and those children need you. I can manage things here with Tom's help. But I do not want to be away from home so much," Mariah said. "You will only be in town a few days a week," Kellan said. "And think about what it will mean for James and Clara. They could get a proper education." Mariah agreed, and the next fall she became the official school teacher for Kingman. She rode into town 3 days a week and taught in a new schoolhouse the town had built. It was rewarding work, and she loved seeing her students learn and grow. James and Clara attended when they could, though they were also needed at home. On Mariah's 30th birthday, Kellan surprised her with a gift. He led her outside to where a beautiful mare stood in the corral, saddled and ready to ride. "She is yours," Kellan said. "I know you have been riding that old gelding, but he is getting slow. This one is young and gentle. I thought you could use her for going to town." Mariah was speechless. The mare was beautiful, a dappled gray with intelligent eyes. She walked over and stroked the mare's nose, and the horse whickered softly. "What is her name?" Mariah asked. "That is up to you," Kellan said. Mariah thought for a moment. "Miracle, I will name her Miracle." Kellan smiled. "That is perfect." Mariah rode Miracle to town from then on, and the mare became her constant companion. It was one more way Kellan showed his love, anticipating her needs and providing for them. When James turned 16, he asked his father if he could start taking on more responsibility. He wanted to learn the business side of ranching, not just the physical work. Kellan was proud and began teaching him about managing money, buying and selling cattle, negotiating deals. James was a quick learner, and Kellan knew the ranch would be in good hands when he eventually passed it on. Clara, at 14, announced she wanted to be a teacher like her mother. Mariah was delighted and began training her, letting her help with the younger students. Clara had a natural gift for it, patient and creative. One evening, when Kellan and Mariah were alone on the porch after the children had gone to bed, Mariah said, "We have done well, have we not?" "We have," Kellan agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed." "Do you remember what you said to me the night you proposed?" Mariah asked. "You said you did not have much to offer," Kellan laughed. "I remember. I was terrified you would say no." "I would never have said no," Mariah said. "Even if you had nothing at all, I would have married you, because you were offering me the one thing I needed most." "What was that?" Kellan asked, though he thought he knew. "Love," Mariah said simply. "You offered me love and a place to belong. Everything else we built together." Kellan took her hand and brought it to his lips. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Mariah Davies. I hope you know that." "I know," she said. "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You were my miracle." They sat together as the stars came out, holding hands like they had all those years ago by the creek. They had built a good life, a life full of love and hard work and family. They had faced challenges and overcome them together. They had created something beautiful out of nothing but determination and faith. The years continued to pass peacefully. James grew into a fine young man and eventually married a girl from town, a sweet woman named Emily. They built a house on the far corner of the ranch property and started their own family. Kellan and Mariah became grandparents, a role they embraced with joy. Clara became the assistant teacher at the Kingman School, working alongside her mother. She was courted by a young lawyer who had recently moved to town, and after a proper courtship, they married in the same church where Kellan and Mariah had wed. Clara and her husband built a house in Kingman, but she visited the ranch often, bringing her own children as they came along. Carl Drummond passed away when Kellan was 45, and Clara followed him within the year. It was a hard loss for both Kellan and Mariah, as they had been like parents. But they took comfort in the fact that Carl and Clara had lived good, full lives and had been happy together until the end. Tom, the ranch hand who had come to them as a boy, eventually bought a small piece of land nearby and started his own ranch. But he remained close with the Davies family, and his children played with James's children. Kellan and Mariah's ranch became one of the most successful in the area. They were known for their quality cattle and their fair dealings, but they were also known for their generosity. They never forgot what it was like to have nothing, and they helped others when they could. When travelers passed through in trouble, Kellan always stopped to help, just as he had stopped for Mariah all those years ago. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Kellan took Mariah back to the spot where he had first found her, all those miles outside Kingman. Someone else's wagon tracks marked the trail now, but the landscape was the same. Red dirt, scrub brush, endless sky. "This is where it all started," Kellan said, looking around. "This is where I found you praying." "This is where God answered my prayer," Mariah said. "I was so lost, so scared. I thought my life was over. And instead it was just beginning," Kellan said. He pulled her into his arms. "I love you, Mariah, more now than ever." "I love you too," she said. "Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for saying I am here." "I will always be here," Kellan promised. "For the rest of my life." They stood together in the place where their story began, holding each other as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. It was the same sky that had witnessed Mariah's prayer and Kellan's arrival. The same sky that had looked down on them as strangers and now saw them as partners, lovers, best friends. As they rode home together on Miracle and Kellan's horse, Mariah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She had lost so much: her mother, her father, her old life. But she had gained so much more. She had found love, purpose, family, and home. She had found Kellan, and Kellan, riding beside her, thought about the day he had felt that inexplicable urge to take a different trail home. He thought about the woman he had found kneeling in the dust, desperate and alone. He had not known then that she would become the center of his world, the reason he woke up grateful every morning. He had just known he needed to help her, and in helping her, he had found his own salvation. When they reached their ranch, the house was lit up with lanterns. James and his family were there for dinner, and Clara had ridden out from town with her husband and children. The house was full of noise and laughter and love. Mariah stood in the doorway, watching her family, and felt Kellan's arm come around her waist. "This is everything I prayed for," she said softly. "That day in the desert when I thought I had lost everything, I prayed for a miracle, and God gave me more than I could have imagined." "He gave us each other," Kellan said. "Everything else came from that." They joined their family inside, and the evening was filled with stories and food and joy. The children played, the adults talked, and Kellan and Mariah sat side by side, their hands clasped under the table as they had been for 20 years. As the evening wound down and their guests prepared to leave, James pulled his father aside. "Pa, I wanted to tell you something. Emily and I are expecting again, our fourth." Kellan's face broke into a huge smile. "That is wonderful news, son. Your mother will be thrilled." "I also wanted to say thank you," James continued, "for everything you and Ma have built. For giving me this life, this example of what a marriage and a family should be. I hope I can be half the father and husband you have been." Kellan pulled his son into a tight embrace. "You are already a great father and husband, James. I am proud of you." Later, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet, Kellan and Mariah lay in bed together, talking in the darkness as they had done for 20 years. "James told me they are expecting again," Kellan said. "Clara told me she is expecting her third," Mariah replied. "We are going to have a house full of grandchildren." "I love it," Kellan said. "I love watching our family grow. I love that our children are happy and settled. We did something right, Mariah." "We did it together," she said. "That is why it worked." They fell asleep in each other's arms, content and grateful. The years continued to unfold gently. Kellan and Mariah aged with grace, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down, but their love never diminishing. They handed over more and more of the ranch operations to James, who ran it with skill and wisdom. They spent their days tending the garden, playing with grandchildren, taking slow rides together on their horses. When Kellan was 55, he had a health scare. His heart had been bothering him, and the doctor told him he needed to slow down even more. Mariah was terrified of losing him, and she hovered over him constantly until he gently told her he was not going anywhere yet. "We have more years ahead of us," he promised her. "I am not leaving you." And he kept that promise. With rest and care, his health improved, and though he was not as strong as he once was, he was still active and engaged with life. On their 30th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were more than 20 people now, counting children, spouses, and grandchildren. They roasted a pig, and there was music and dancing. As the sun set, Kellan stood up and raised his glass. "I want to say something," he announced, and everyone quieted down. 30 years ago, I married the most incredible woman I have ever known. I found her in the desert, alone and scared, and I thought I was saving her. But the truth is, she saved me. She gave my life meaning and purpose. She gave me a family, a home, a reason to work hard and be a good man. Everything good in my life comes from her." Mariah was crying now, and Clara handed her a handkerchief. Kellan continued, his voice thick with emotion. "We have built something beautiful here, all of us together. This ranch, this family, it is what life is all about. And I am grateful for every single day, every single person here. Thank you for being part of our story." Everyone cheered and raised their glasses, and Mariah stood up and kissed Kellan in front of everyone. "Thank you for finding me," she whispered against his lips. "Thank you for being here." "Always," he whispered back. The party continued late into the night, but eventually people began to leave or settle down to sleep. The grandchildren were bedded down in the house and the barn, and Kellan and Mariah finally found themselves alone on their porch, watching the stars. "I have been thinking about that day a lot lately," Mariah said. "The day you found me. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had taken the other trail?" "I try not to think about it," Kellan said, "because it hurts to imagine a life without you." "Someone else would have found me maybe," Mariah said. "Or maybe I would have found a way to survive on my own." "Maybe," Kellan said, "but I am glad it was me. I am glad I was the one who got to love you, to build this life with you." "Me too," Mariah said, resting her head on his shoulder. "I prayed for a miracle and you came. You said I am here, and you have been here ever since, through everything. And I will be here until my last breath," Kellan promised. "That is a vow I made 30 years ago, and I have never regretted it for a single moment." They sat in comfortable silence, the silence of two people who knew each other so well that words were not always necessary. The desert night was cool and clear, and the stars stretched out forever above them. "What do you think happens after?" Mariah asked softly. "After this life?" "I do not know," Kellan admitted. "But I like to think we will be together, that whatever comes next we will face it the same way we have faced everything else." "Together," Mariah said. "Together," Kellan agreed. As they grew older, Kellan and Mariah became pillars of the community. They were the couple everyone pointed to as an example of lasting love. Young people getting married would come to them for advice, and they always gave the same counsel. Choose each other every day. Work hard. Be kind. Do not let pride get in the way of forgiveness. Love is not just a feeling. It is a choice you make over and over again. When Kellan was 62, he and Mariah celebrated their 40th anniversary. By now, they had a dozen grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. The ranch had been officially passed to James, though Kellan still helped out when he could. Mariah had retired from teaching, and a younger woman had taken over the school. They lived quietly now, enjoying their time together. Kellan still rode out to check on the cattle sometimes, though Mariah worried every time he left. She had her garden, her sewing, her grandchildren who visited constantly. They had built a full and beautiful life. One evening, sitting on their porch as they had done thousands of times before, Mariah said, "I want you to know something." "What is that?" Kellan asked, taking her hand. "I want you to know that if I could go back and change anything, I would not," she said. "Not even the hard parts. Not my parents dying, not being stranded in the desert, because all of it led me to you, and you are worth everything." Kellan's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I feel the same way. Every hardship, every loss, it all makes sense when I look at what we have built." "Promise me something," Mariah said. "Anything. Promise me that when one of us is gone, the other will keep living. Really living, not just existing. Our children and grandchildren will need us." "I promise," Kellan said, though the thought of life without her was unbearable. "And promise me you will remember all the good times," Mariah continued. "Not just at the end, but all of it. The beginning, the middle, all the little moments that made up our life." "I promise," Kellan said again. "But you are going to be around for a long time yet. We both are." And for several more years they were. They celebrated their 45th anniversary, then their 50th. The 50th was a huge celebration with the whole town invited. The church held a special ceremony and the mayor gave them a plaque honoring their contribution to the community. But the best part was being surrounded by their family, by all the people whose lives they had touched. Mariah passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 74. She had been in good health right up until the end, and Kellan told himself to be grateful that she had not suffered. But the loss was devastating. He felt like half of himself had been ripped away. The funeral was the largest Kingman had ever seen. People came from all over to pay their respects to the woman who had taught their children, who had been kind and generous, who had loved her family so completely. Kellan stood at the graveside, supported by his children, and he thought about the first time he had seen her, kneeling in the dust, praying for a miracle. "I was your miracle," he whispered to her as they lowered her casket into the ground. "And you were mine." After Mariah's death, Kellan struggled. He had promised her he would keep living, but he did not know how to live without her. His children were worried about him, and they took turns staying at the ranch, making sure he ate, making sure he was not alone too much. One day, about 3 months after Mariah's death, James found his father in the barn, sitting on a hay bale and crying. He sat down beside him and put his arm around his shoulders. "I miss her so much," Kellan said brokenly. "I do not know how to do this without her." "I know, Pa," James said. "But she would not want you to give up. She would want you to remember the good times, to be here for us and for the grandchildren." Kellan nodded, wiping his eyes. "You are right. She made me promise to keep living. I just do not know how yet." "One day at a time," James said. "That is all you can do." Kellan took his son's advice. He got up every morning, even when he did not want to. He tended the garden Mariah had loved. He spent time with his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandmother. He went to church every Sunday and sat in the pew where he and Mariah had sat for 50 years. Slowly, the sharp edge of grief dulled into a softer ache. He would never stop missing her, but he learned to live with the loss. He found joy in his family, in the ranch they had built, in the legacy they had created together. On what would have been their 55th anniversary, Kellan rode out to the spot where he had first found Mariah. He had not been there in years, but he found his way easily. He stood in the same place where she had knelt praying, and he looked up at the sky. "I kept my promise," he said out loud. "I am still here, still living, but I miss you every single day. Thank you for 40 years of the best life a man could ask for. Thank you for loving me, for building this life with me. I will see you again someday and we can be together again. Until then, I will keep going, for you, for our family, for everything we built." A warm breeze blew across the desert and Kellan felt a sense of peace. He knew Mariah would be proud of him, proud of their children, proud of everything they had accomplished. He rode back to the ranch feeling lighter than he had in months. Kellan lived another 5 years after Mariah's death. He remained active and engaged with his family, a source of wisdom and love for them all. He taught his grandchildren to ride, told them stories about the old days, passed on the values he and Mariah had lived by. When he was 79, he became ill. The doctor said his heart was finally giving out. James moved him into town, closer to medical care, but Kellan knew he was dying. He was not afraid. He was ready to see Mariah again. On his last day, all his children and grandchildren gathered around his bed. He looked at each of them, his eyes still bright despite his weakness. "I love you all," he said. "You have made my life so rich. Take care of each other and remember what your grandmother and I taught you. Love is what matters. Family is what matters. Be good to each other." As the sun began to set, Kellan's breathing grew labored. James held one hand, Clara held the other, and the rest of the family surrounded him. In his mind, Kellan was back on that desert trail, seeing Mariah for the first time, kneeling in the dust. He remembered the way his heart had lurched at the sight of her desperation, the way he had known instantly that he needed to help her. He remembered riding up, dismounting, and saying those three simple words that had changed both their lives. I am here. And now, as he drew his last breath, he felt Mariah's presence. He could almost see her, young and beautiful again, reaching out her hand to him. He smiled and closed his eyes, and his spirit left his body to join hers. At the funeral, James spoke about his parents' love story. He told the assembled crowd about the day his father had found his mother stranded and alone. He talked about how they had built a life from nothing, how they had loved each other through every trial and triumph. He said that his parents had shown him what true love looked like, and he hoped to honor their memory by loving his own family as deeply. The family buried Kellan next to Mariah, under a cottonwood tree on their ranch property. On the headstone, James had inscribed, Kellan Davies and Mariah Davies. Forever together. She prayed for a miracle, and he said, I am here. Years later, the ranch was still in the family, now run by James's oldest son. The house had been expanded, but the original 3 rooms Kellan had built were still there, carefully preserved. The family made sure the story of how it all began was passed down through generations. They told their children about the day a young woman knelt in the desert praying for help, and how a cowboy had appeared like an answer to that prayer. They talked about the love that had grown between them, the life they had built, the legacy they had left. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting over the Arizona desert, family members would stand on that old porch and imagine they could feel the presence of Kellan and Mariah, still together, still watching over the family they had created. The ranch stood as a testament to what 2 people could build when they chose to love each other completely, to work hard, and to never give up. The miracle that Mariah had prayed for that desperate day had come in the form of a cowboy named Kellan Davies. And the miracle had lasted a lifetime, creating ripples that would extend through generations. Their love story became legend in Kingman, told and retold, inspiring other couples to believe that true love was possible, that prayers were answered, that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best. In the end, Mariah and Kellan's story was simple but profound. She needed saving, and he saved her. But in the saving, he found his own salvation. They built a life together based on love, respect, hard work, and faith. They raised a family, created a legacy, and showed everyone around them what it meant to truly love another person. And when their earthly journey ended, they left behind a family that would carry on their values, their love, and their story for generations to come. The ranch still stood, the land still produced, and the family still gathered together, all because one woman prayed for a miracle at sunset, and a cowboy rode up and said, I am here.